That about covers it for the classic villains this round. Next time in the series, we're looking at some more vintage baddies before moving on to feature films. I'll see you then. That's it for this round of villains. The next time I do one of these videos, we're going to the movie villains, starting with the Queen from Snow White. See you next time! I appreciate everyone's patience as I work on these videos. I'm not sure when the next Disney Villains installment is coming out, but it's sure to be a fun one. The Little Wooden Head has a lot of bad guys to contend with after all. Our next episode, however, will feature one of the biggest embodiments of evil, the devil himself, or at least the Disney version. Join me then for a night on Bald Mountain with the villains of Fantasia. Dumbo and Bambi are after that, and that's where we'll be picking up. I'll be exploring the Ringmaster, who Disney seems to want us to think is a real villain today, despite him not being any better or worse than most of the characters in the original movie. And then we'll be looking at the one, the only man, and discussing whether or not he is a true villain. He made the American Film Institute's list of greatest movie villains, so that has to count for something. I guess. See you then. With all that in mind, when we pick up next time, we'll be looking at Brer Fox and Brer Bear from Song of the South. I'm aware of this movie's controversial nature, and I promise I'll do my best to handle it with respect and care. See you all then. In the next entry, we'll be looking at Lumpjaw the Bear and Willie the Giant from Fun and Fancy Free. Either way, we'll be moving past Melody Time for this reason straight to the adventures of Ichabod and Mr. Toad. This blessed animation fans with the one and only Headless Horseman, along with a gang of weasels that have stuck around for the long haul. Thankfully, the next movie we're covering was a major success and a return to form. In our next entry, we'll be looking at Cinderella's stepfamily, the Tremaines. That will take us to our next entry, where we'll be looking at the mad villains down the rabbit hole in Wonderland. So plant some red roses, hold on to your heads, and I'll see you then. In the next entry, we'll be looking at another adaptation of a classic British children's story. Captain Hook, Mr. Smee, and more assorted pirates than you can count await us in Neverland. In our next entry, we'll be looking at the villains from Lady and the Tramp, and I assure you, it will be a much shorter video. The next entry probably won't be for another few months, but it's gonna be a big one. We'll be looking at the mistress of all evil herself, Maleficent. The next animated Disney movie to come out after Sleeping Beauty was 101 Dalmatians. Cruella de Vil is almost as legendary as Maleficent, and some might argue that she's even more so. I imagine that will be another big video, so I'd like to do a shorter villains entry in the meantime. It's my list, so I make the rules. In this upcoming bonus entry, we're going beyond the screen to the theme parks. Pirates and Phantoms await us as we look at the Disney Parks villains. Whew, and that does it for Disney's theme park villains. In our next entry, we'll be getting back on track with another classic Disney diva, Cruella de Vil. Our next villain is just as fun, but hasn't had quite as big a career as Maleficent or Cruella, except where comics are concerned. There, she is the reigning queen. Next time, make way for the magnificent, marvelous Mad Madam Mim. In the next entry, we'll be looking at the villains found deep within the jungle and over Cape Suzette. And that concludes this entry in the retrospective. The next feature to hit theaters was The Aristocats in 1970, but we're not getting to that one just yet. I apologize to Edgar the Butler's fans, all 5 of them. In 1968, the second Pooh short, Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day, premiered, and with that came a literally nightmarish group of honey-stealing heffalumps and woozles. In our next entry, we'll be looking at the relatively dark side of the 100-Acre Wood. In our next entry, we'll be looking at Edgar, the unfortunate butler from the Aristocats. In his defense, he has a few more fans than I thought. And speaking of lions, our next video will be about another Lion King. No, not Scar, a different phony king. Next time we'll be looking at Prince John and his crooked cronies from Robin Hood. The next Disney animated movie to come out was The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. However, we've already covered the Pooh franchise. The next movie we'll be covering is The Rescuers, along with its eventual sequel. Well, speaking of nuance, the next movie we're covering is The Fox and the Hound, which features the grayest morality we've seen so far. I'm aware that Pete's Dragon came before that, but as colorful as those villains are, none of them were animated. Before we cover Amos Slade, we're doing a catching up video. Next time, I'll be covering the various things that have cropped up since I've started this retrospective, and some things I missed. Among other things, we'll be looking at the Twisted Wonderland mobile game, and the remakes of Pinocchio and Peter Pan. Wish me luck, everybody. This is gonna be a doozy. For understanding. In our next video, we'll be back on track with The Fox and the Hound. Amos Slade is one of the first Disney villains to have a real nuance to his motivations, to the point where some might not consider him a true bad guy. I've thought a lot about this, and it's certainly complicated, but we'll get to that soon enough. Also, as a bonus, we'll head far from the nature preserve and into cyberspace. There, we'll take a quick look at Disney's first computer-generated villain, the MCP. It's the 80s, all right. Unfortunately, they weren't out of the woods yet. Our next movie, The Black Cauldron, proved to be just as difficult a production. It did, however, give us one of the darkest, most frightening Disney villains of all time. In our next entry, we'll be looking at the Horned King. Disney's next movie was The Great Mouse Detective, with a truly fantastic villain, Ratigan. But before we cover the world's greatest criminal mind, we're going to look at Disney's early animated TV series. Being cartoons in the mid-80s, the three that we'll be looking at all involve colorful, silly, marketable animals. The Wuzzles, Gummy Bears, and Fluffy Dogs await us. That concludes the first of many trips to the small screen. We're heading back to theaters next to cover one of my personal favorites. For a mouse detective to be truly great, they need an equally great adversary. And no one is greater than Professor Ratigan. Our next entry will be fudging the rules a bit. Is The Brave Little Toaster a Disney movie? You could argue both ways, but it's a very important film to me, so I'll bend the rules in its favor. I'm always ready to talk Toaster. And I won't be alone. I'll be having input from the movie's director, Jerry Rees. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all on the cutting edge. Well, the cutting edge circa 1987. Our next entry is undoubtedly Disney. We're diving into the money bin to talk about the many foes that went up against Scrooge McDuck. It's a Carl Barks tribute video covering the original comics and the different versions of DuckTales. Truly, it is a duck blur.